It's the new bullshit because the way we talk about data is holding the industry back. One person's buzzword is another person's breakthrough, disruptive interpretation of what's happening. What are you going to do for me? How is data going to help my organization is what every CEO is probably thinking, if not saying aloud, because we love to explain how we got there. And first we tried this, and then we did that, and then we pivoted here, and then we tore it all down. If you're in front of a bunch of business leaders who are looking for value from the work you do, you don't have to give them the whole step-by-step process. When you get the yes, shut up. Got to have some form of collaborative view so people understand consistently how the business is doing. Find the story.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles. And joining us today is Scott Taylor, who describes himself as the data whisperer. Click on the loud hailer on Scott's LinkedIn profile and you'll hear him say, I help organizations tell their data story. If you dig back deep enough in that profile and through Scott's dozens of experiences and roles, you'll find a chunk of time in the mid-90s to the late 2000s when he was with Nielsen, responsible for TD Lynx, the company's database of retail and on-premise location data. He rose to be Executive Vice President on Master Data Innovation Business Opportunities, working with the CEO on the global innovation team. Since then, Scott has gone more plural, consulting with media and tech businesses from Microsoft to WPP, Spiceworks to Dun & Bradstreet. He's run the delightfully named Meta Consulting since 2018. Consultant, keynote speaker and author, in 2020, Scott published his book, Telling Your Data Story, Data Storytelling for Data Management. And since 2023, Scott has been the lead member of a collective called the Data Avengers, a coordinated group of independent content creators who describe their purpose as amplifying and enhancing the data event experience. In his keynote, Scott describes his mission as to help organizations bridge the story gap between data and the business. I first came across Scott on his YouTube channel towards the tail end of the pandemic, reading his cautionary tale, The Little Red Data Hen, to his grandson on YouTube. It is a brilliant updating of a children's farmyard classic. We'll definitely come back to that, and I'll include a link in the show notes. Now, as Scott has said from many a stage, there's not much whispering when it comes to the data whisperer. And I sense we are in for a fantastic time today. It's great to have you with us, Scott. Welcome to Data Malarkey.
Thank you, Sam. What a great intro. I want to hear more. It was fantastic.
Well, listen, I trust it was a good summary of who you are and what you do. Is there anything that you'd like? Anything you'd like to add? Anything I got wrong?
You covered it. I'm sure we'll touch on the data puppets at some point, but you hit all my high points for sure.
Very good. Now, listen, before we focus on data malarkey, bullshit, and the rest of it, let's start with a question that's designed to get to the heart of what makes you, you. And it doesn't necessarily get you to talk about the 9 to 5. So tell me, Scott, if you would, how do you spend your time?
I spend it right now just doing content for brands wherever I can. I try to do as much creative things as possible, videos, puppet shows, animation, webinars, all that kind of stuff, podcasts, wherever I can, but really focusing on the storytelling aspect. Being an independent content creator, I have an enormous flexibility. I just work with folks that I like to work with. We try to make sure we have only fun things we're doing at this point in my career, and I'm just having a ball.
Very good. Now, listen, we call this podcast Data Malarkey because there's just, you and I know so much nonsense, baloney, BS, what we call bollocks on this side of the pond in data storytelling. I also love the much underused word malarkey. I think there's a certain ring to it, and it's not used in many podcast names, which is one of the reasons we chose it. But tell us why you think there's so much malarkey about data in business today. Why, as you put it, data is not the new oil, but the new bullshit.
It's the new bullshit because the way we talk about data is holding the industry back. And that's because we just love, and when I say we, I mean, the whole industry and the trends that we see going on and the nature of the discussion tends to focus on too much on the technological aspects of it and how things are done rather than why they are important. So we love buzzwords. What I find hilarious is that, one person's buzzword is another person's breakthrough, disruptive interpretation of what's happening. But we pick at each other constantly around this just techno-babble that I think drives the business to a point where they just don't want to hear it anymore. What are you going to do for me? How is data going to help my organization is what every CEO is probably thinking, if not saying aloud, when their data leaders come in to show them the latest implementation plan for the analytics graph hub fabric mesh.
Yeah, and it really isn't driving businesses forward. I mean, you talk. Data. It ought to be the liberation. You and I both know that when you get down and dirty, actually into the data, there can be a huge amount of value. We're definitely agreed that it's holding them back. I really enjoyed, and I'll include a link to this. Your data is a new bullshit keynote at the big data conference in London last year. And you said it's vital to get to truth before meaning, to determine truth where data starts before deriving meaning where data ends. Can you unpack a little bit more about how and why businesses are getting this so wrong to start with, and then we'll come back and think about how we might help them to get them to do it better?
Part of that headline was my attempt to boil down my entire data philosophy to the fewest number of words, which is a technique I suggest to folks sometimes. Like, what's the fewest number of words you can use to describe something? And in my case, my data philosophy, I got down to 3 words: truth before meaning. Determine the truth in your data before you derive meaning out of it. And that determining truth part is really focused on data management, data stewardship, data governance, data quality, master data, reference data, metadata, MDM, RDM, PIM, RIM, DAM, all those foundational activities that enterprises must invest in and focus on to build a foundation for all the cool, hot, sexy, sparkly stuff on the analytics and business intelligence side. AI, ML, Gen AI, all the fancy stuff that really does bring value, but it doesn't bring the value you want in terms of deriving the meaning out of your data unless you have determined the truth first. And so just a simple headline of make sure you focus on that foundational piece and just trying to find a new way to talk about it. And part of answer your question, why people are so attracted to the cool stuff is because it's a lot cooler. Believe me, talking about Gen AI and, implementing agents across your organization to transform the nature of how you do, let's say, customer management is a lot funner and a lot sexier than, we need data stewards to make sure we have consistent spellings and disambiguate our entities and all that other sort of back office sounding, very technical, somewhat boring stuff. But ask anybody. It's like the health of your business has a lot to do with the health of your data. And if you want to be a healthy person, what do they tell you? Eat right and exercise. And sometimes nobody wants, they're looking for the Ozempic solution to their problem, and you still got to do the hard work.
Now I wasn't expecting us to go into fat jabs, but I think it's a perfect analogy. Now you mentioned AI and ML and Gen AI and so on, and also that you spend a lot of your time in content creation yourself, to demystify and to get people to get towards truth before meaning. And I think I'm right in saying that you describe yourself as you're not a specialist, you're not a deep data guy, you're not a technologist. You're more of is it fair to call you more of a kind of data storytelling philosopher and a practitioner rather than a deep technologist?
Yeah, I am not technological at all. I don't go under the hood. I don't touch anything. I am about the why, not the how. And there's a lot of folks that you need both. Nobody's saying you don't need both, but we over-rotate on the how, especially in the data space, because we love to explain how we got there. And first we tried this, and then we did that, and then we pivoted here, and then we toured all the... If you're in front of a bunch of business leaders who are looking for value from the work you do, you don't have to give them the whole step-by-step process. Focus on that why. If they ask how, they've probably already bought the idea. But there is not a CEO and certainly not a CFO I've ever met who cares about how you're going to implement these technologies until they understand why they are important to the business and be able to succinctly articulate that in the metaphorical elevator. It is critically important for data leaders today.
I've done a lot of work over the years with market research businesses, particularly those doing corporate and brand reputation, helping them not to have 162 slides to say, welcome, oh tech giant. We've looked at your corporation in 50 markets. We've covered 17 different metrics, and let us show you in each of the following 162 slides how none of them have changed in the previous quarter. That sort of obsession with showing how the sausage is made,
Right.
And what we did is just enough to get people to glaze over. I remember in the pandemic being on a data readout with a client. And it was early days of the pandemic because my client, she's a brilliant marketeer. She was so bored with the readout, you could see her playing Sudoku in her glasses. You know, it just lost. She had just lost the room. But listen, going back to Ozempic and AI, do you see? Are you? I mean, you're observing that people are saying this is the kind of the cool stuff to be in. But do you see? Either a lot of people kind of piling into AI to try and do the data storytelling bit, and do you think that is a good idea if they are doing that?
I'm sure it helps. I mean, I use ChatGPT all the time. It certainly helps with the tactical stuff. It's not going to come up with a lot of new ideas, but anything is going to help you get to where you have to go. And probably Gen AI is a form of Ozempic for data stewardship. Why does a person have to go through all these thousands of lines of customer records to find exceptions? And that's all great. But if you don't feed it with the right stuff, it's not going to get to where you want to go. And again, it's back to my truth before meaning scenario where, and that it's undeniable, right? It's as sure as gravity. I mean, what goes up must come down. What goes in must come out. And we learned that on the first day of data under, garbage in, garbage out, rubbish in, rubbish out, however you want to say it. But it's undeniable. And anything we can use to help us get that foundational piece, that input stuff better, absolutely. But that cause and effect is there. And, showing a nice little proof of concept with perfect data in a very, petri dish sort of way, that's nice to get some interest, but you can't scale that unless you've got, core master data, reference data, metadata, standards within your organization, consistent structure across data that you're really leaning on. And it's just, I don't know why I have to keep saying, I've been talking about this for 30 years in the data space, so it seems to keep me in business, but it's a message that helps, that's important to remind people of. And my challenge every day is, okay, is there a different way to say this so I can break through? What's the different technique I can use to kind of get through the noise and get people to realize, look, you've got to at least focus some time on this. It doesn't replace it. You need both. Again, truth and meaning. That's how you get the value out of data. But it's hard to make data management sexy.
And I mean, it's fair to say. I think there's a fantastic example in I think it was the London, but it may have been somewhere else because I've done. You're a compelling person to do homework on, Scott, because not only is it good content, but you're also very entertaining. But I think. I mean, no one has perfect data, right? I mean, when you're talking about kind of customer records, I think you're talking about kind of either the city or the states that kind of represented in dozens and dozens of different ways. It's just unrealistic to expect people to have perfect data, and maybe AI can take the brunt work out of that.
Yeah, I'm sure it can. I focus on when we try to talk about perfect data or structure, and I talk a lot about sort of the structure of data. People like to use data quality, which I'll tell you, that word itself doesn't carry the weight that it should, especially with business executives. When you and a lot of data management folks, data quality folks, focus on, we need better data quality. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, of course we do. Why are you even talking to me about this? But that word, if that word worked and that positioning worked, we wouldn't still be talking about what we're talking about today, which is why don't we have, better data quality standards across organizations? So use different terminology. And for me, the word structure carries a lot more weight and gravitas with somebody. Our standards, because people understand what that is, how to, the operational importance of having a standard in anything. nuts and bolts, engineering, construction at home. We plug in our appliances into the right kind of outlet. Everything works well because they've set standards. And doing that for your data is also important across an enterprise. And just narrowing that down, there's this classic ocean boiling technique that most people look at. So I boil that down to what I call the 4 C's of data structure: code, company, category, and country. You have a code on every record, uniquely identifies it. You've got a company, so you have some form of hierarchy, parent-child relationship. No matter what kind of entity data is, there's some kind of relationship there. You have a category, so you know what kind of thing it is. That drives a lot of targeting, penetration. I'll tell you, most people have a top 10 category called other. So we know how well that's going in a lot of organizations. Or other. There's another going. You ever seen other? And then just because they all start with C, you have country or some form of geography, so you know where something is. I mean, how important is geography? Geography almost drives everything that a person does and can do based on the geographic, where you are geographically. So just that simple kind of structure. We need a code, we need a company, we need a category, we need a country, we need these foundational pieces. After that, you can go nuts. But people tend to focus on, let's have 3,700 different attributes for some form of entity when they don't even realize they have a whole bunch of duplicates because their unique identifiers aren't unique enough. So just, again, bringing it back to most conversation in the data space is where data ends up. All my conversation is about where data starts.
Got you. Absolutely got you. Now, I don't want to talk about Little Red Data Hen quite yet, but I know that in that silos feature in a big way. I mean, clearly, in organizations, in many organizations, many big corporations, there's both a data fight and a turfiness, or a kind of a turf war between who's going to attribute the success and who's going to run away from or hide themselves from the failure best. And so you might have marketing, and you might have sales, and you might have e-commerce, and you might have CRM done separately. And these different silos, slightly different kind of takes on who owns what data where within the organization. Do you see data silos as first question, do you see data silos as being a fundamental part of this problem? And two, second part of this question, have you seen that getting worse since the pandemic when people have become much more distributed?
It's always part of the problem. If you have 2 different versions of something, start there. It's going to be a problem when you try to compare those versions, or when one department says, here's my view of the world, and another department says, well, no, this is my view of the world. Now, that's legitimate. Finance looks at a customer differently than marketing looks at a customer, different than sales looks at a customer. So you have to have some way to translate between those. But when the CEO says how many customers we have, the answer can't be, well, it depends on how you're looking at it. There needs to be some form of, again, this word truth within an organization about the way we look at things. How do we look at our brands? How do we look at our relationships? Customers just one, but there's vendor, partner, prospect, citizen, patient, client, consumer. Again, sort of an example of the different terminology that different organizations use for the same thing. Those are all relationships. You don't have relationships, you don't have a business. So that's the data about your relationships is, I would suggest, the most important data you have in an organization. And then your brand entities and your geographies, really, really simple, basic stuff that you got to have some form of collaborative view so people understand consistently how the business is doing. You can't define your market share by you and everybody smaller than you in the market that you've defined. I mean, it's just not objective enough. And silos are inherent based on different systems are there to support different departments. That's the nature of the beast. That's not going to change. Has it gotten better or worse? I think the more data you have, the worse it kind of gets. And now with AI and then Gen AI, this stuff just is going at scale like nobody can believe. So it's the risks are very high in terms of seeing yet more versions of it. But I keep saying it because it's like, remember the basics. You don't have to go back to basics. That's not where, the only thing you do, but you've got to start with these foundational, basic, standardized, structured elements. Otherwise, you're not going to rows and columns, right? I mean, it's like, the rows are the master data. The columns are the analytics. It's all about that, even if it's just a metaphor instead of, people jump on and say, well, what about graph database and all different ways to look at it? Yeah, but if you talk to a head of sales, they probably want to see a chart with, here are my relationships and here are the things about those relationships that are important.
Hello there. It's your host, Sam here. Well, if you've been inspired by this conversation and want to find out what type of data storyteller you are, why not visit our scorecard at data-storytelling.scoreapp.com, complete 12 simple questions, and you'll instantly be served with a report telling you what type of data storyteller you are. Now, back to the action. When you were talking about kind of taxonomies, I mean, I have done a lot of work with pharma businesses, and it's so interesting that depending on whether you work in patient engagement or commercial or analytics, you might talk about the very same individual as a customer, a client, a patient, or a partner. I mean, sometimes it can beg a belief. Now. I love your kind of your fundamentalist. I don't mean that in any kind of terrorist way, but your fundamentalist approach
I'll take it as a business compliment. Yes.
No, it's absolutely a compliment. But your fundamentalist approach to not necessarily back to basics, but starting from basic principles. And I've heard you say more than once that there are three core aspects to data storytelling: first, the data; second, the story; and third, the telling. Talk us through that.
You start to tease it apart. So when people are trying to convey something to a business, again, tell a story, and data storytelling, probably still one of the most hottest non-technical aspects of the data space. And it was the focus of my book, as you mentioned in the intro. You've got the data part, and data people start with the data. So they know that. And the story is putting it in some form of organized fashion that has a narrative, beginning, middle, and end. What's the point of it? But then you get to the telling part, which is delivering that. And that, I think, that my belief is data storytelling and those three things, that's in descending order of expertise for most data leaders out there. They know the data, they can put a story together, but can they convey that message in a compelling, business accessible way? Because it doesn't matter how good the data is, and it doesn't matter how well structured you think your story is. If you can't tell it in a way that somebody understands it, it's all worthless. So these things all have to go together, and we don't spend a lot of time on the telling part, the practical aspects of it. How do you present this? What kind of terminology do you use? It goes from the philosophical all the way down to the real tactical. Like, okay, if you're going to present something, you're going to talk to all your leaders, stand up, okay? Stand up at the end of the table and make sure you have all their attention. Don't do distracting things like hand out the deck beforehand so everybody can look through it. And, if you're a vendor, they just check for pricing right away and they're not even listening to you. Really basic stuff like that, all the way up to, okay, does the story you're telling, are you delivering it in a way that people are actually listening to? And a lot of that has, part of why I wanted to be on your podcast there. I love the title, and I agree with you. Malarkey is a fun word that isn't used enough, but certainly means, what we both talk about. Skip all that technical buzzword speak. Don't try and impress them with, the latest, greatest kind of thing you think is important, because that vocabulary doesn't ring true with the business side. They're not up to the latest thing that they're seeing in, on the analysts or on LinkedIn or whatever. And speak in their language. If you want to talk to the business, speak in the language of your business.
I'm going to come back to empathy shortly, but you make me think. I spend a lot of time, as I know you do, but getting people to think about the audience, think about the data tolerance of the audience, to rehearse, to speak it out loud in this telling bit. There's a great piece in the Harvard Business Review about 5 years ago called about the art and science of data storytelling. It was talking about kind of the types of teams you need to build. By a guy called Scott Berinato, and he says, efforts often fall short in the last mile when it comes time to explain the stuff to decision makers. Now, we put 95, 99% of our time into cleansing the data sets, into trying to make sure they're as perfect as possible. And I completely agree with you. We never even think about what it's going to sound like when it comes out of our mouths and needs to go into the minds of others. Do you think, I mean, I often think that data storytelling comes down kind of, not entirely, but successful data storytellers have empathy. Insight and empathy aren't the same thing, but they are able to appreciate what the story is going to sound like to their audience. They have humanity, so they don't drown you in numbers, and they really understand what the data tolerance of the audience is. Because even if you're talking to a group of CFOs who are very data numerate and have kind of got there by understanding the numbers, you will understand your numbers that you have been working on a million times better than they're ever going to understand them, because you've been working on them. Do you think that this empathy, humanity bit is important?
It's critical if you want to, and that's not even limited to data. It's just limited to human interaction. So no matter what you're saying to somebody, and we're talking about business here, so in any kind of business context, obviously it has a lot of value in personal life too, but in business context, you brought up a good point. What does it sound like? And if you haven't heard what it sounds like before you've done it, then you haven't done the right kind of homework you should have. I go to data conferences all the time. I'm sure you see this as well. And I see some, very capable data leaders coming up and telling their story of whatever example. And a lot of times I wonder, is this the first time they're ever saying this aloud? It sure sounds like it. Did they go through the rehearsal process? Did they practice this in front of the mirror, in front of their team? I'm a professional public speaker. I tell people I have a fear of not public speaking. So part of my training is to really listen to myself. I record everything I do. I play it back. I'll listen to this podcast and go, okay, this part worked. This part didn't work. Doing some of that, do something. Try it at least once. And if you think, oh, no, I can just look at it on my computer at home and I'll just click through and you're imagining it in your head. That's not the same as standing up and saying it and recording it and listening it to yourself. The next presentation you do, just put your phone on record and just listen to it and play it back again. There's no better teacher than your own self. Listen to I've cleaned my dialogue of all kinds of verbal tics I didn't realize I had, despite my training. And it just makes you a clearer speaker. And if you can speak clearly and directly, then people will understand you better. And isn't that the point?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of Dan Pink, the American business writer, and in his book "To Sell Is Human," he says that we are all in the moving business. We're in the business of persuading people. And now that might be persuading people to understand that they disagree with us and don't want to work with us. But how much better is that than having people just go, may I, or I don't understand? So I'm totally with you.
Storytelling is a superpower, and it will get people to go from, I have no idea what you're talking about, to how do we live without this? And that's what you want. That's what you want from folks, to open up their eyes to say, oh, I didn't realize we could do that. Or, oh, let's get that. Because again, in business, you are there. If you're in a business context, you're talking to business leaders, you're looking for something: funding, support, engagement, approval, some action. It's rare that they'll just say, oh, just talk us through a nice, documentary of what you've done this week. It's about moving the business forward. And that means you need to suggest or gain some form of action at the end of that conversation.
Ideally, either never darken my door again, or where do I sign? Absolutely,
right.
yeah. I want to ask you a question about data visualization. There are lots of, I know this is true in the States as well as in UK and in other markets too, there are lots of courses about data storytelling, which are fundamentally about data visualization, about how to use Power BI or Tableau or even Excel more effectively, how to strip away chart junk. And I think it's something that, I don't really have a visual eye. All of my parents, I had many parents, lots of divorce and remarriage and stuff.
I know the feeling. We could talk about that on another podcast.
All of them were, when I knew them, kind of creative artists or craftspeople of some description. So they took that. I went and did the kind of the data and the words bit instead. Glass engravers and mosaicists and potters and so on. But I've always felt that to play around in these brilliant tools that exist, these brilliant data visualization tools that exist, is partly from a statistician's point of view. I retrained as an experimental psychologist for a bit, but also from a storytelling perspective. If you chuck a big enough data set into a data visualization tool, you're going to find some connections. And my view is that actually you need to know the story the data tells before you get anywhere near a visualization tool. Are you as purist as me on that, or do you?
Yeah, that sounds right. I'm not a data visualization expert. And I look at, first of all, yes, I agree. So find the story in there somewhere. And the storytelling, that data storytelling that I like to focus on it's less about the analytics storytelling, which is, I wish data storytelling had been called analytics storytelling, because that's really what it is. It's about how to put, as you say, a metric or some form of insight into a compelling form, whether it's visual or talking points or that sort of thing, to speak about a specific type of event or incident or proposal or whatever. The data storytelling I focus on is more for data management, why managing data is of strategic importance to an organization, why building that foundation is critical despite the distractions of all the cool, hot, super, sexy, fancy stuff. And frankly, if you don't tell that story of data management, you're not going to have any analytics storytelling to do, because you're not going to have the right data to be able to put it together. But regardless, I agree with your point. Find the story. Sometimes it's, the story and then you find the data to help support it. Sometimes it's, I'm looking at the data and that helps me understand what's happening, and I got to put that into some form of narrative. But the story's in there somewhere. I mean, I tell people, it's one of my headlines in my presentation. Every enterprise has a data story to tell. The story is in there. And you're almost the journalist in terms of who, why, where, what, how, finding it. And, if you take more of a journalistic view rather than a novelist view in terms of putting a story together, you're looking for why something happened or what's going to happen next or what was the cause of this, rather than trying to create some flowery discussion that meets the preconceived notion you already had.
I adore it. Was in the answer to the previous question, but I absolutely adore your line, which I just scribbled down on my pad, of the fear of not public speaking. I will, if I steal that, Scott, I will always give due credit to you. But I think that is a marvelous fear to have. Yeah, you'd rather be naked than not be standing on a stage, right?
Yeah, I know. Yes, for me, it's like I love it. It's the thing I think I do best of all the things I have in my and I had a lot of dramatic arts training in college. I did a bunch of community theater. I was never going to be like, an actor, but I just loved it. And I will tell you, decades later, I draw on that training more than anything else on a daily basis than, everything else I learned in college and so on. And it gives me I used to think an unfair advantage, but now I leverage it because this is what I do for a living. In that situation, as I was talking about, where you're in a data agenda and you're at an event and there's like 5 people come up there and they're just, clicking through slides, or my least favorite opening, I'm the last thing between you and lunch. I like to yell, then get out of the way. I'm hungry. If you don't think you should be there, I don't want to even watch you. Versus just taking the space, being confident, opening with really strong, understanding the rhythm. My favorite thing in life is to hold for laughs. So I try and do that as much as possible.
Very, yeah. Listen, this is today's the first, we've sort of kind of circled around and been aware of one another for a bit, but this is maybe me longer of you than me. But there are lots and lots of parallels. I wasn't an actor at college, but I did a lot of emceeing of comic reviews.
Oh,
Loved
wow.
doing
Okay.
that. And one of the continuous personal development things that I do, although I don't think it would fall into anyone's CPD, is going to drop in improv classes just to be able to tap dance. You're in a room with powerful, awkward, hungry people, and you need to be able to read that room. And so many data storytellers fail to do that.
Yeah, improv is great training. Yeah, and it's scary. I mean, when I talk to a bunch of dailies, they say, okay, you should rehearse and use words like that are more, dramatic arts oriented than business. They get tense. They get, imagine throwing them in. I want them to. It's like, I'd rather you feel uncomfortable now than in front of your CEO. You've got to do that work. There isn't a professional athlete who doesn't train, right? Why is this different? Why is this so different? You think they just like, okay, Sunday, here's another game. I'll go out there and play. They're working on it. They've got techniques. They're looking for their weak spots. They're trying to develop the strength where they need to. And all of that with anything that you want to be good at, you've got to put the work in.
Now, talk of dramatic arts leads us very naturally onto the data puppets. Tell us about your data puppets.
So data puppets are a group of characters that I created a couple years ago that I'm having a ball with. There's a series of videos and more to come there. If any of your viewers want to see it, just Google the term data puppets. I'm that confident. I did that. That's what inspired me a few months ago to do more of this. I Googled data puppets and literally I'm the only thing that comes up. It's 100% organic reach there. It's no SEO investment at all. It's just Google has never seen the words data and puppets together other than in my context. You can also go to datapuppets.com. But it stars the CDO, the chief dog officer, who is trying to manage enterprise data in his organization. He hires a catsultant from Kinsey. He's got an ITB that speaks only in buzzwords. That it goes up or down from there depending on how you want to look at it. There are about 20 characters at this point, and I've taken a Simpsons-like casting approach where I've got some data luminaries doing voices and sometimes a little bit of a parody of themselves. In this context, and it's just a ball. So I had a couple of episodes. I did a keynote at Big Data London last year about the data puppets. I'm coming back again this year and doing an updated version of it, and it's just a blast. And when I first did it, it was just set up punchline, it was just like boom, boom, boom. It was really tight. For me, it was really fun creatively to work on that, and I got such an overwhelming reaction from the data community. And what surprised me the most is it wasn't like, oh, this is funny, this is cute. The number one reaction I got was, this is just like my life. I had people say, I just texted this link to a friend of mine to explain to them, this is what I do for a living. I'm like, these are puppets just arguing and talking to each other, a cat and a bird and a dog. But somehow I seem to tap into the angst and the of the data space. And through these characters, you can kind of, like what I like to say is get to the funny faster and really just kind of accelerate the discussion. And the ridiculousness of it is, I mean, it's funny. It's one of those, it's funny because it's so true. So more to come on those. The epic that I'm doing is called Journey to the Center of the Single Version of the Truth. The greatest data story ever told. And it follows, it ends in a big musical number where they all sing G-I-G-O, garbage in, garbage out. And again, a bunch of friends help me with the music, and I've got plenty that I haven't even edited and pushed out yet, but it's a unique and interesting and hilarious yet informative view of the data space that's people find very relatable.
Fantastic. I adore, as a cat lover, it's quite rare that actually my cat Quincy Jones doesn't interrupt a podcast. He's been on a few, but the idea of a cat sultan from Kinsey is comedy gold. Absolutely.
It's very, I have to check these out.
And tell us also, if you would, about the Little Red Data Hen.
The Little Red Data Hen, which is very near to my heart because it's my grandson, Data Whisperer Jr. He comes over every summer. We live a little far away, so he visits, we visit on occasion. He came over, and I just had this idea for this book, the little red hen, as we all know, who will help me make the bread, who will help me grow the wheat, who will help me, grind bake the flour and all that stuff, just lent itself to an enterprise data manager looking for help to make better data for their organization, and the other parties, in sales and marketing and finance going, that's no, not I, says the sales cow and the marketing pig and the finance puppy. I've had a couple of people in marketing say, why does marketing have to be a pig? Well, I think it's cast quite well. So I read this little book to him, and he's adorable. I show it in all my keynotes. And I tell people, I show it at the end because I can't follow him. He just killed. He was 4 years old when we did it, and he's just adorable. And the prep was just pretend this is the greatest book you ever heard. That was it. That was all my instruction to him. But what came out of it, and the best parts of it literally are the spontaneous parts, because he was really listening, and he started asking questions that weren't in the script and having comments. And I had to, again, you're in drama and improv, you got to be in the moment there. It's like, okay, I got to react to that. And that interplay for me ended up being some of the best parts of it. But it ends very dark. I won't give away the ending so people can watch it. But it's a blast. When I show it, I stay up on stage when I'm showing this video. And I know it by, every moment of it. But I just love watching folks across the audience, watching them react. What do they laugh at? What don't they? And when the ending comes, it's always like this big shock that folks have. And it's hysterical. So very proud of my grandson. He was recently named in the Data 10 under 10. So that's a big moment for him.
Perfect. No, without giving anything away. So, but those lines, particularly the technical question. There's one technical question in particular he asks in that was entirely spontaneous, just because he was listening.
He said, "Well, we talk about silos, and the line is, the data was Little Red Hen was something along the lines of." She had a problem because her data was stuck in silos, and because it's on a farm, these were real silos. And he just says, "What's a silo?" In this little beautiful 4-year-old voice, "What's a silo?" And I have to explain it to him in some quick way, and that was not in the script. So you kind of see me, I know it, so one quick look, and we go back and forth. And then I fed him a bunch of lines, obviously, some of the technical stuff. Like he goes, "Oh, should she use a data mesh?" Which he didn't come up on his own. But it was so fun. And people just love it. My wife keeps telling me I have to do a new one. The next one, I guess, will be, it's tentatively titled The Emperor's New Dashboard. I feel like that one writes itself.
Very good. We will wait for more of that and more of the data puppets, and maybe a Harry Shearer appearance on the data puppets. Who knows? Now, without asking you to call out, we'll draw to an end relatively soon, but without asking you to call out kind of the worst offenders in low-grade data storytelling, are there any examples of kind of disaster scenarios that you've witnessed during your career, or the things that come around time and time again?
I'd say time and time again, and what I tell people too sometimes is you want to tell a story, but you don't want to tell your life story. So starting with, here's where I started, and here's where I went to school, and then I had this job, and then I quit that, and then I sold this company. Especially on the vendor side, right? There's just like a long, complicated, like who cares? And I was always on the supplier side, and I tended to cut out these first, somewhere between 2 and 12 slides that were given to me by whatever marketing department I was working with that told the whole history, especially of like a company like D&B, which is 175 years old. Believe me, you go all the way back to, 5 presidents worked here, and here's just like, who cares? So getting to that point is so critical, even in designing your slides. I mean, it's rare to see a supplier, or even in sometimes, on the internal enterprise side when they're presenting, where they draw a graphic and they usually put themselves in the middle. It's like, here's everything, and here's all the problems, and here's all, and we're right in the center. Most of the time you're not in the center. Maybe when I talk about data management, I actually say, draw that on the bottom, okay? If you want to talk about a foundation, draw it like a foundation, okay? It's not vertical, it's horizontal. Again, rows and columns. That geometry kind of works for me. But just this need to just almost brag about what your history is, that if you didn't have a certain amount of credibility, you wouldn't be in the room. So remember that. They already did that due diligence at some level to say, okay, you can have my time. What are their issues? What are their challenges? What are their problems? Why are you there? What thing are you going to try and solve? That's the lead. And if you waste your first couple of minutes on a whole bunch of, stuff about me, you're not going to get that back. And if you, I mentioned, I've spent more than my share of time in front of CEOs of large corporations, and invariably the meeting gets cut short, not because of you, but because some other emergency. So, oh wait, I had 20 more slides. I wanted to get to again, journalism practice, cut from the bottom, start with the lead. It's not a suspense story. You're not trying to get them through like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. Get to your point as early as possible and then prove that point rather than taking them through the journey you went through to discover that thought. And so flip it back around. But it's just inherent in the space. And again, I don't think it's limited to data. That's just the world I live in. You pick any kind of category and folks are still suffering from that same thing.
I've often working with insight and analytics people in pharma businesses who are scoping markets to find out whether this new wonder drug is going to be a blockbuster or not. Is this a unicorn billion-dollar drug or not? What the commercial leads want you to say is, yes, invest your money here. This it's worth investing here. And then what they will do is, as you said earlier, what they'll do is, how did you work that out? Tell me, take me through your work. Right. Once you've got them, or actually, there's no chance that this is going to touch the sides because our competitors are ahead of us, and we're way behind the market, so we should invest. Hang on, I don't agree with that, because then you can get into a data debate, right?
Right. No, great point. They say, well, tell me how, tell me why, tell me more. That's a buying signal, regardless of whether that buy is with cash or engagement or funding or whatever it is. That's a signal of interest, and that's what you want. And another thing I see constantly is people just keep talking. So I'm fourth generation sales and proud of it. That's where my heritage was. Moved into marketing and strategy, and I mean, marketing for me is kind of selling at scale in a lot of ways. So it was a natural progression. But my father, taught me in the field early on. And one of the things he told me was, very early on, it's even in my book. It's like, when you get the yes, shut up. They've said yes. Don't keep. And I learned that the hard way, because he told me that after an anecdote where I came in, very short way to describe it. Somebody had said yes. And I said, that's great. It's just like last year. And they actually said, well, I didn't like last year. And it was just disintegrated in front of me. And I came back and told my father, he's like, when you get the yes, keep talking about other things, but, yes. Oh, wait a minute. Don't say yes yet. I've got 72 more slides I wanted to show you in 2 different appendix. And what's the point of why you're there? The point is to get them to agree. The point is not to do your whole presentation.
Quite so. Now, because of my generation and the TV I watched when I was growing up, I've got to have a Columbo question. Just one more thing.
All right, one more thing.
In the way that you work with data, is there anything that I haven't? Data storytelling. Is there anything I haven't asked you that I should have done?
Let's see here. No, you covered quite a bit of them here, but I should come up with something. I guess I would talk about how I sort of learned my boundaries is sort of an interesting part of my story, I guess. And for me, it was really important to do that, because I proudly say I'm the why, not the how now. I never look under the hood, but I wasn't always like that. And I got into all kinds of trouble when I would get into explaining to people how to do things. And for me, it was a real epiphany moment of realizing, well, if you're talking to somebody and explaining how to do something, you should have that experience. It shouldn't come from what somebody else told you about how they did it, which invariably would happen, because I'd work at these highly technical companies and I always have so then I began to get a technical partner with me to go, okay, they're the how part. And what I also did for me, technique wise, was once I got confident enough, awesome at telling stories, I can make almost anything sound good. You were talking about, your background too, convincing people of things. That's my family's superpower, is we convince people of things. Wouldn't you agree? That's, doesn't always mean we're right. Doesn't always mean we're accurate. And so literally going into the most technical side of the companies I'm working with and presenting a story draft and saying, you need to tell me where I'm wrong here. And being confident enough to say, I'm going to make it all sound good. Because if it doesn't sound good, I'm not even coming in yet. That doesn't mean it's correct. So I want to be as right as possible. So if you hear me say something or hear me present something, don't, oh, Scott, we don't want to change. You need to, stop me there or tell me later, but make sure I'm as accurate as possible. Because I'll develop that and make it still sound good. You don't want to be part of, you don't want to create your own data malarkey and data bullshit. You need to, and there are those. So I've always partnered with somebody, once I realized that, who really knew how to get this stuff done and could say, don't say that. That's not right.
I love it. Delightfully gestalt way to come full circle with truth before meaning.
Right.
Very good. Very good. Finally, Scott, where can our listeners and our viewers find out about you, your work, what you're up to online, social media?
I'm all over LinkedIn. Just look for me, Scott Taylor, the Data Whisperer. You can take a look at my book, Telling Your Data Storytelling for Data Management, 99% buzzword free. That's available on Amazon for, I think it's 47% off now on Amazon, which is wonderful. That's still out there. It's still a bestseller for my publisher. And Meta Consulting, which is .com, which is my website. I've got a YouTube channel as well, Data Whisperer. But if you search for Scott Taylor Data, I pretty much come up somewhere, somehow. So you can see my content on YouTube or on LinkedIn or on my website.
Fantastic. And datapockets.com will certainly be in there as well. Thank you so much for your time, Scott. I think if there were only more people with your approach to using data smarter, there'd be rather less malarkey, rather less bullshit in the world of data storytelling by data leaders, and rather more data-driven common sense. Keep fighting the fight, Scott. Lovely to meet you.
Great to see you, Sam. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Data Malarkey. To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.